All right, I realize I'm the last thing standing between a group of security professionals and an open bar, so I will try to cut this short. So today we're going to talk about some InfoSec big picture items, specifically InfoSec teams, as well as some quick wins that you can take away back to the workplace. So a little bit of an intro to myself. I love to learn red teaming, but I am a blue teamer at heart. As an example of that, I started IT in help desk, and for some reason when I was in help desk, I stumbled across the Offensive Security's OSCP course and thought that was a cool idea to take while I was only, educated enough to be working in help desk. So I had no idea what I was in for. It was way over my head, but it did open my eyes at the time to the world of security. And ever since then, even when I was working in just IT, looked at everything from a security angle. After that, was consulting for several years, and now I'm the SecOps manager for Activision Blizzard. A little bit of a shameless plug. My blog is rootIsTheLimit.com. It's not a lot of content at the moment, but I'm hoping to fix that. So some recent fun I've been having, I've been trying to dive back into honeypots. I've been working a lot with the Tango Honeypot intelligence platform. It's a really great platform to work on. It's actually just all run through Splunk. Uses a lot of, mainly uses Kippo, but you learn a lot of good stuff and allows you to pivot and really get actionable intelligence out of it. Another honeypot system I've been working with is Canary by Thinkst, which isn't designed to generate intelligence, but is so much designed to just alert you when evil happens. For example, if it's listening on RDP and someone tries to log in via RDP, it'll generate an alert, so it's meant as the canary in the coal mine. Another small little tidbit is I've been told quite a bit that I resemble this guy. I didn't put any weight into it until I ran into some uncomfortable situations at the airport, so I just go with it now. It's whatever. So path forward, I'm sure a lot of you know, a lot of security people run into the same issues where people outside of our realm don't always take our warnings seriously. But I think part of that is that our warnings to the rest of the world will never escape our own security echo chamber if InfoSec as a whole does not get in a better and more aligned position. There's a good quote on Twitter a while back. It was something like, all security people will agree at 90% but argue to the death on the last 10%. And I think it's that last part that's really holding us back right now. In addition, so a lot of this presentation will be about observations of InfoSec teams, how they work, some of their behaviors, and how to become better. And finally, some quick wins, like I mentioned, to take back to the workplace to make your security posture stronger. So some observations while consulting and working with a lot of my peers is that not only IT versus security, but even within security teams, they often work in silos. So a lot of times you'll have an operations team, an architecture, an engineering team, and they work completely independently of each other with very little communication between them. And sometimes even within operations, you may have a forensics team that works completely independently of the rest of the ops team. In addition, many companies still lack the necessary visibility to detect evil or even make informed risk-based decisions on their security posture. Companies that embark down the visibility path are often blasted with so many alerts coming from so many tools that it's also impossible to tell the signal from the noise. Now lastly, teams do not often take the time to fully learn and understand the tools that they're deploying in their workplace, so they don't get everything they can out of them. So an example of a silo, like I mentioned, most often there's a split between the architecture and operations security teams. So, and even within security operations, you have forensics, incident response, continuous monitoring, and vulnerability stuff that can range from vulnerability management to just vuln scans. Kind of depends on your organization. And when you have a lot of teams like this, you end up with 3 different silos with very little cohesion or synergy between them. So, and just even separate from an operational standpoint, a lot of times this ends up bringing about completely different tool sets that don't integrate either. So all parts of the security team really need to align and collaborate at all layers of the security program. If architecture team fully grasps the ops side, then they can build solutions which include more efficiency and capability for the ops team. If the ops team understands engineering, they can make informed recommendations on hardening for remediation against the threats that they're actually encountering. In addition to that, when the ops team makes recommendations on remediation, they really need to take into account the actual business impact. And it's hard to really ascertain what the business impact is unless you have a good understanding of the actual engineering behind it. For example, if something's going to take 168 man hours versus something that'll take 8 hours with no business impact, it's easy to tell which one will happen first. So kind of an example of what you can achieve when the operations team and the architecture and engineering team are working together is just consider this workflow example. So at the tech stack, if you want to operate, or if you want to automate and guide your ops workflow, say you have a sandboxing solution in place that kicks off an alert of downloaded malware. Your SIM is aware of this alert and the report and can actually correlate traffic patterns based on the malware report to determine which endpoints may be compromised. The SIM then sends a notification to Encase or your other forensics platform to automatically take a cross-network image of the infected machines. Then following the image, SIM sends a message to Carbon Black to automatically isolate the infected machines from the network and block the MD5 hashes related to the malware. SIM registers a ticket in the incident response platform which contains the findings and all the steps completed. So if you take a step back of this and look at it, if it's 1 a.m. and an incident happens and your system responds to it this way, you get in the office at 8 a.m. next day, your IR team is going to have a ticket waiting for them with everything that was completed, and 90% of their incident response is actually taken care of. So this may or may not catch advanced hacker groups. It kind of really depends. However, it does lessen the operational burden of your security team and allows them to really focus on finding evil. So in addition, back to the signal to noise, a lot of teams receive so many alerts that it's cumbersome to react and find the right one in the mix. As an example, Target had FireEye in place which detected the malware, but it happened to be one of the alerts they didn't respond to or investigate. So a lot of this is actually due to lack of hardening or perimeter defenses. So if defenses were hardened more, it would prevent a lot of the alerts in the first place. For example, egress filtering, temp folder block, which we'll get to that more later. So the main goal in this that everyone should take away is you must be able to stop the bad actors who aren't even trying before you can hope to find the ones who are actually trying to get in. If you're dealing with 100 malware alerts a day, there's no hope that you would actually find APT. That's some buzzword bingo for you. So another observation is a lot of teams are still just implementing blinky boxes as opposed to realizing or having a goal in mind of what they're trying to do. So before you buy anything, just kind of sit back and think about what you're trying to accomplish. What is it you're trying to stop? What part of the kill chain are you actually trying to prevent? In addition, actually operationalizing the item needs to be part of the discussion up front. I've been to a lot of companies where they've implemented SIM or cyber threat intelligence, and actually operationalizing it wasn't part of the discussion. So once they got the engineering part and it was all done in place, they were kind of like, what now? They didn't have any workflows built around it. They didn't have any idea how to get good use of it, especially in CTI. They had a whole repository of threat intelligence, but not a whole lot, operationally that they were doing with it or could do with it. So in addition, spend time really learning all of the tools and the options you can do with it, as well as try to think about it from a hacker perspective. So when you configure it, whichever way you do, try to think what ways are there to thwart it or get around it. And then we're going to look at a specific example of why this would benefit us. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with sandboxing, but just kind of as a highlight, or an overview so we're all on the same page. So the idea is you have a device at your perimeter that records all files coming in and out of your network, and if it doesn't recognize the file based on the hash, it runs it in a Windows 7 or Windows XP VM, watches the behavior, determine if it's malicious, and if it's found to be malicious, it'll create a signature as well as send you a full report back saying, hey, this malware was downloaded, here's everything the malware did and why we think it was malware. Well, earlier in 2015, a sandbox evasion technique came out, and TrustedSec actually wrote a good post about it. What they were doing was basically checking to see if the virtual machine had less than 2 virtual CPUs. Because in these big cloud environments like Wildfire and FireEye, since they have to scale to such a degree, every virtual machine is configured with 1 CPU. So what they found out is if they just told it not to run if it only had 1 CPU, they were able to bypass these defenses. Because if you think about any end user station today, they all have between 4 and 8 machines, or 4 and 8 CPUs. whenever this came out, I got a good chuckle out of it because there's actually a small thing with wildfire that a lot of people often overlook. And that's this screen right here. I don't know if you can see it very well there. But the default settings actually determine the file size limits that can be tested by wildfire. So if you look down at the MS Office document, the default is 500 kilobytes. So if an Office document goes through it that's larger than 500 kilobytes, wildfire will actually ignore it and not even test it in the first place. So you could go through and code looking for one CPU, or you could just embed an image in it and it would do the same in the end. As you can see, it's the same behavior with PDFs, which are actually even smaller size at 200 kilobytes. Obviously, all of this can be adjusted within the tool, but as you may know, a lot of organizations often overlook the default settings. So another observation is just kind of more at a high level. It's 2015, and most of our security tools still don't integrate. You know, WTF? If I have a sandboxing solution and it finds a malicious file which is emailed to my organization, why doesn't my AV agent become aware of the signature? Why doesn't my URL filtering automatically become aware of the C2 URLs and IPs? Or if my AV is aware of a signature, why is that signature not synced with all my perimeter boxes, including my spam filter, to automatically block the stuff before it even hits the endpoint in the first place? So if one security control becomes aware of a threat, all other security controls should become aware. So I think we need to create an ecosystem of security mechanisms, not just one-off silos. So to do this, and I know that cyber threat intelligence has kind of done a lot of this at heart, but I feel like it only went to the 50-yard line, whereas we need to take it all the way to the touchdown. So in this example, we have a signature behavior server at the center, which basically becomes aware of all these threats and integrates with different vendor solutions. And in this example, if the IPS becomes of a threat and generates a signature, it's shared with the centralized signature server and is passed to all of the other controls in the environment. Now, I know a lot of vendors probably, they have a little bit of a conflict of interest, because if you look at AV vendors or IPS vendors, the intelligence behind their signatures is kind of their bread and butter, so they don't readily want to share it. They just want to say they have the best tool out there to block all the threats. So there's kind of a little bit to overcome. But for security professionals to be successful at the role, I think this is really the direction we need to head in. So, and I'm sure most of you know, but today's most common attack vector is actually, and there's a lot of places that have written about this, is actually email attachments. And one of the most common ones still today are Office documents with macros built in. Now the way they behave kind of varies from time to time. Sometimes they download the malware directly, or sometimes they make a call to PowerShell.exe, or sometimes it's even a PDF that's running JavaScript in the background. Or even recently, I've run across some PDFs that actually embedded a Word document within the PDF, and then the user had to open that Word document and then run the macros. So it's, you know, kind of becoming a little crazy. So when we go through some of these quick wins, a lot of them are kind of designed specifically to thwart against this type of threat. And the reason is twofold. One, it's what a lot of the malware we're seeing today, like Dire, as well as a lot of pen test engagements, this is actually their foothold in the door. If you look at Dave's program that he put out, the unicorn.py, it actually generates a macro-based PowerShell backdoor. So some of the things we'll talk about will actually prevent a lot of that. So now for some quick wins. So quick win number one. Deploy an advanced endpoint security solution. Now examples are Bromium, Traps, Bit9, or EMET. I want the main focus here to be on EMET though, as it's the quickest win due to it being free and easy to deploy and control. One downside, major downside, is it does lack visibility, so it's almost like a set it and forget it. Once you deploy it across your network, you can control the mitigations using group policy, but if it actually prevents a buffer overflow on an endpoint, you have no way of knowing about it unless you're syncing your Windows event logs from all of your end user stuff back to a centralized server. But that level of logging is often not easy to attain due to the storage requirements. In addition, once you deploy EMET, make sure that you ensure to configure it to monitor processes not configured in its app profiles. So a lot of people will actually deploy EMET and then just kind of leave it there, hoping it's doing good for them without realizing some of the specifics that it does. But it actually embeds a DLL into every process that's configured in its profile, and that's how it monitors for some of the memory-based attacks. And without configuring that process, you may not be getting all the protections that you want. And this is especially true for any custom-based apps or rare third-party apps that you may find in your organizations. So an additional benefit to EMET is more operational. So anytime a new zero-day vulnerability comes out, what is it that all the security teams do? We all run around with like a chicken with their head chopped off, screaming, script and patch all of the things. Now, whenever we continuously do that, it creates a burden definitely on the IT operational team that's responsible for these patches. And if you continuously do that over and over again, at some point, it'll almost be like crying wolf. And if you're doing it once every couple of weeks, once every month, it'll quickly become too much. So if you have something like EMET or traps in place, which do anti-exploit / anti-zero day, you have a compensating control in place to kind of counter a lot of these vulnerabilities that are coming to light. So from a risk perspective, if you have a compensating control in place, do you really need to patch it right away, or can you just wait till your next normal patch cycle, into this month, next month, whatever it is? And that, obviously that's not an answer I can give you. It's up to each organization to determine their own risk level. But if you have a compensating control in place, it definitely helps lower the risk and ease the burden of IT ops. Quick win number 2, and this is probably one of the bigger ones, control execution of files within the temp directory. So there are third-party programs that make this easy, like Traps or Bit9. Even Kaspersky Suite can do it. In addition, you can also use group policy, app locker, or software restriction policies. App locker, I believe, from a licensing perspective, is restricted to just the enterprise version. But software restriction policies can be used in any version, to my knowledge, so it may be a little bit easier to configure depending on what you have licensed in your organization. Some example file types to block execution of include DLLs, executables, VBS, temp files, PowerShell scripts. I would say 90% of the malware I've encountered in the past 2 years would be 100% blocked utilizing this. 90%, if you're not familiar with or in depth with a lot of recent malware, basically they copy, almost always download stage 2 malware into the temp directory, and that's what they execute it out of. I believe that to be 2 reasons. One, no matter the user account that it's running of, it's going to always have write access to the temp directory. And number 2, how many end users do you know go looking in their temp directory, especially when there's going to be 1,000 files in there and they're not going to be able to tell what's evil and what's not. In addition, kind of another small thing I discovered was if you use Metasploit's script to basically automatically start the interpreter backdoor, unless you customize it, it seems to block it oftentimes because it basically creates a script in the temp directory that calls the executable and run it, so that's kind of another small benefit as well. There is going to be a little bit of an impact. For example, some programs may actually legitimately execute out of temp, so you'll have to create a whitelist for those. Some examples I found are any ISO burners or creators. For some reason, when you're installing those or running those, they'll run something out of temp, so you'll need to whitelist those. In addition, Java updates. Now, depending on your organization, this may or may not affect you. If you're not doing patch management on Java, it won't affect you to begin with. But if you're not doing patch management and you're relying on the agent to actually automatically update itself, that's where it'll execute out of temp, and this will actually start blocking that from happening. So, quick win number 3, review your URL filtering categorization. Obviously, in every URL filtering solution, there's obvious ones to block, which include malware, phishing, proxies, dynamic DNS, etc. Also, try to block unknown and uncategorized stuff. This will have an operational impact, and you need to account for this before doing it. However, it may prevent a lot of malware or backdoors from phoning home properly. Because if you look at the life cycle of any new URL or domain that comes up, before the URL filtering vendor becomes aware of it, it's basically unclassified, unidentified, or unknown. So if you're blocking that category, you're blocking it from the set the URL is used in the first place. However, in addition to this, there's also a lot of legitimate stuff that is out on the internet that the URL filtering vendors haven't become aware of. So you just need to be ready with a workflow in place for when an end user reports something that's being blocked. You need to have a process in place to react to it appropriately, or obviously the business is going to get upset. And lastly, but not least, I think a lot of organizations kind of miss this as well, is that anytime you run across a URL that needs to be recategorized, we all are great at recategorizing it in our own tool.
Sorry folks, but the video rig seemed to have frozen up at this point, so here on to the rest of the video. You see the slides move, for some reason we don't get the speaker. The Ava Medias, I need to find a better replacement for. Sorry for the inconvenience.